Obesity is the biggest killer of horses. So be honest with yourself. Is your horse fat? It's a growing problem in the equestrian world, with over 70% of horses worldwide considered overweight. How can we tell if our horse is fat? Why do we find it so difficult to admit there's a problem? And what can we change today to start our horse's weight loss journey? Well, Katie Kershaw is an equine vet, an advanced practitioner in equine internal medicine at Ryder Davies Vets in Suffolk. Katie is passionate about helping owners with their overweight horses, even if it means having those difficult, tricky conversations at the yard. And she's going to help us get our horses in shape. Katie, welcome to Curious Equestrian.
Hi, nice to see you, Anna.
Katie, tell us, why is obesity one of the biggest killers of horses?
Well, what we're looking at is around 40% of leisure horses in the UK that we deem obese. In some populations around the world, you're kind of talking over 70%. And it is a huge, huge welfare crisis, far more than we really think about in terms of skinny horses or kind of neglect and things like that. And actually, we can actually now talk about obesity being a form of neglect in cases where things aren't being done about it. It can lead to conditions such as laminitis. It can have a significant negative impact on the horse's joints, and their cardiac health as well, their heart health. So in a really similar way to diseases that we talk about in people, we definitely see similar and even more in horses.
What does a fat horse look like? And I ask that because do we really know as owners what we're looking at?
So there's a really cool study a few years ago which talked about body condition scoring. So body condition scoring is the way we see fat on horses. And there's two different ways of doing it. You can kind of score them between 0 and 5 and also between 1 and 9. And these researchers took a group of vets, nutritionists, professionals and horse owners. And the horse owners consistently scored their horses lower as a body condition score compared to the equine professionals in the study. So as horse owners, are we very good at seeing if our own horses are overweight? Probably not as good as we could be. And I think the problem is that we see our horses all day, every day. You know, it's the same as us. You don't notice the weight creeping on until you get to the new season and try and put those jeans back on. And I think that this is the same with horses. You know, you're seeing them all the time, and what is normal for you to see. Sometimes it takes somebody on the outside to come in and go, oh, I think we might have crept up a bit too much there.
And is it the vet's responsibility to oversee this, Katie, and to highlight it and to put the horses on a diet, or should it always lie with the owner?
Good question. I think it's all of our responsibilities. And like I say, if we go back to the idea that when you look at your horse all the time, it's really hard to make these assessments. I think that as professionals, whether that is as a vet or a farrier or a nutritionist that's maybe only coming in, or even a saddle fitters are brilliant for watching weight creep on. I think it's for all of us to have the conversation. Again, one of these studies that they've done recently, University of Liverpool have got a huge interest in this area. And it was a survey, and it was like, if the farrier didn't say your horse is fat, they didn't think their horse was fat. And so I think, you know, as vets, sometimes we're slightly kind of scolded that we're over dramatic, and that we're being a bit mean or a bit harsh. But no, it's definitely for all of us.
And how do you feel as the vet going in to see a horse maybe about something completely different, and you're greeted with a fat horse? What do you say and how do you approach that?
I may be the wrong person to ask because, as you know, I am an extraordinarily blunt person.
Brutal is the word.
You're going to get told. No, I think we have, hopefully, you know, the point of a good client-vet relationship is that you're capable of having difficult conversations. And that difficult conversation is potentially about your horse's weight. I have clients who apologize to me before I'm allowed to see the horse because the horse has gained weight compared to last time I see it, and they know that we're going to have the conversation. I think it's really unusual if I introduce the conversation that the client isn't aware that we're going to be having it. And I think, like I say, it's really, really super important that that conversation is had as kind of as regularly as is possible, but in a really productive way. How do I do it? Normally it's shoulder pad's got a bit bigger. Oh, I'm not quite so capable of listening to this heart this time. At which point we normally start having a whole conversation about the horses in general and how the kind of weight management has been going recently, rather than it being, hey, my horse isn't fat, but maybe that's my population of clients.
And do you try and find a sense of humour? Because, you know, it is one of those touchy subjects, isn't it, Katie? You mentioned owners and clients being on the defence. Do you try and use humour and sort of a lighter approach, even though it's a very serious subject?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the one way of not having someone kind of follow your advice and guidance is by them blocking off what you're saying the moment you start talking about it. And so I think trying to use empathy and, actually humour a lot. We do talk, we do have a little joke around about it, but using that to try and have a conversation which people want to be equally involved in, rather than just going, your horse has a body condition score 5 out of 5, you're a terrible person, I can't believe your horse got this point. Of course that's going to make people shut down and not want to work with you. Whereas if you can sit there and talk through their nutrition, talk through their diet, talk through their grazing habits, that's an extra 5-10 minutes in my day. But actually for that horse and that client, hopefully that's going to make quite a big welfare difference.
And you mentioned that owners will actually give their horses a lower body score rating than actually is real and realistic. What is a fat horse, Katie? Can you help us identify that in our field?
Well, I guess the main thing is that being realistic about your breed, your muscle mass, because they have quite a big impact on body condition scoring. Trying to be consistent with which score system that you're going to use. I nearly always use 0 to 5, just because in that study they showed that we had kind of better agreement, and it's slightly less complicated than a bigger one. And so time of year as well. So it's August. Some people have had some grass this year, not everybody. So, I wouldn't want that horse to be more than a 3.5 out of 5 in August. If we're talking in February, March, I don't want that horse to be more than a 2.5 out of 5. And that's kind of going back to that intricacies that a lot of our leisure horse populations are native breeds or native types, or at least have something native crossing into them. And we have this natural thing in the wild populations where the weight would go up and down with the seasons, and trying to make sure we're facilitating that. But anything over 3.5, at a push we'd say 4. But if you have a horse that has been laminitic in the past, actually up to 3.5 is probably a bit much, and we wouldn't want to be more than a 3 out of 5. So I don't think there's one way of saying this horse is definitely fat. It's all about looking at the horse as a whole and its management and its previous disease to then know what's fat for them.
And when we're looking at the attributes of our horse, what areas do we need to be mindful of when we're looking at weight?
And I think that's really important, because actually we should be body condition scoring over 3 areas. We should be looking at the neck, the back, and the bottom as 3 separate pieces, and then getting ourselves into a thing in the middle, which is why, we have a half measure there, because actually we're averaging out. You can have horses that have a huge cresty neck, but don't actually have a huge amount of fat deposits on the rest of their body. You can have horses that have a significant lack of top line. Maybe they've been out of work for a while, or they're a horse that doesn't really carry their muscle very well, who, if you just body condition scored them in the middle of their body, they would actually come out quite low, because their spine would be sticking up. You'd then have the drop off and then into the ribs. And you'd be like, God, but I can see my horse's ribs. They can't possibly be fat. And actually that part of the horse is just because it hasn't got the muscle there. And then we go over to the bottom, and you have some horses that have those big heart-shaped bottoms that we definitely don't want. But we also have some horses that just have their fat pad sitting over their tail head. And so again, there's not one size fits all in terms of these measurements, but certainly the cresty neck is the place that gets me a little bit anxious when I'm looking at horses that I consider to be overweight.
And that's because that is also a sign of, is that right as well, of being more susceptible for laminitis and EMS and Cushing's?
Yeah, so we think that the cresty neck is a place where horses that have a higher cresty neck score, so bigger cresty necks, seem to be more at risk of equine metabolic disease, insulin dysregulation, and then laminitis compared to when you have kind of fat that's just all over the body. There is a really interesting area of research to think about in the same way that we think about it in people. In people, we have subcutaneous fat, so fat under our skin, and you can have people that actually look on the outside quite fat, yet on the inside they're not particularly fat at all, and they are generally quite metabolically healthy. They don't seem to suffer much in the way of health conditions. Where you have people who look quite slim on the outside, but have a lot of fat around their organs on the inside, and they are the ones that are struggling metabolically. And we think that might be the same for horses as well. We're not able to fit a horse's whole abdomen into an MRI scanner, which is how you would assess it in people. They just don't have the technology yet, especially in the UK. But from post-mortem studies and things like that, we actually can see that some of the most dangerous fat, like in people, is that fat around the organs. And so you can have a horse that actually isn't even that fat on the outside, or maybe just only has that cresty neck on the outside. But on the inside, we actually have a lot more fat around our organs than we can see.
Wow. So how do we know if that applies to our horse or not?
That's the challenge. So what we know is a horse that's fatter on the outside is more likely to be fatter on the inside. But I think what we have to do is we have to assume in a way that if we can see fat on the outside, it probably is there. There's some things where you can kind of try and do ultrasound scanning and stuff like that. But I think realistically, we're not quite there at the kind of horse owner assessment stage yet. But it just sometimes gives that explanation. You know, you've got that horse that isn't that fat, actually has lost quite a lot of weight, but is still getting problems with laminitis. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's because that fat on the inside hasn't quite fixed itself yet as well.
So what do we do, Katie? Because obviously, for those who have a competition horse, they are actively working and training towards a goal, keeping the horse fit. But for those of us who have horses that aren't ridden or who are leisure horses and ponies, happy hackers, might not be doing high intensity workouts, how do we up their exercise and drop the fat?
I guess the best thing that we can do as horse owners, guardians of horses, however we look at it, is how do we get the horse's state back to a more natural one? So you don't see morbidly obese wild horses. Now, I would caveat that some of the horses that are in rewilding projects are, because we are putting native horses into environments that aren't necessarily designed for that type of native horse. But in the majority of times, it's very unusual to see a Dartmoor pony on Dartmoor that's overweight, a Welsh mountain pony in the Welsh Mountains that is severely overweight. And so how do we make our leisure horses, how do we make our companion horses environment more like that? Now, we're in Suffolk. I can't turn Suffolk into a Welsh mountain. It's just not physically possible. But what does a horse spend its day doing in the wild? Walking and eating and walking and eating. And they walk miles. What do they do when they're a companion horse or a leisure horse? Like you say, not off around Burley next week.
No.
What do? Well, they stand and eat, because the setup that we have in our leisure horse population in a lot of the UK and other parts of the world is that we have these small paddocks, and they're for ease, especially at livery yards, things like that, where it's really hard to create something that isn't a small paddock. And so anything we can do to try and replicate the walking that they would be doing in the wild, in their natural environment, is going to significantly improve their calorie kind of burning, i.e. their movements, and also the fact that they're not going to be stood in one place constantly eating. there are lots of different ways of thinking about how we do that, some more controversial than others. One of the things that a lot of people are talking about at the moment are track systems. And Roxanne Curtin and another group of vets fairly recently have released a paper talking about kind of how positive the behaviour is in horses and track systems versus maybe some of the other systems, and also how well they've kind of done their weight reduction. So we know that in a horse in a track system compared to a horse that is just in a strip of grazing, which is what we kind of have historically always done, a horse in a track system walks a lot more than a horse in a strip, even a long, thin strip. And we tend to see more expression of like normal behaviours in the track compared to in a strip as well. So all of those things are going to be helping facilitate us get that movement into our kind of everyday horse. And the other one, which obviously is much more controversial, but I'm a big fan of, and I know that I've enforced on you, is the use of grazing muzzles. Again, how do I make the grass that has been suited for a dairy cow suitable for a little Laminitic Shetland that should live in Shetland?
And with your mention of that, Katie, I wish I could wave to you the two that came in the post this week, because we've been having the absolute drama of the miniatures getting used to them this week, which has been a real adjustment. And you know that when you first said to us grazing muzzles, me and my mum were like horrified, because I mean, I'm sure we've all seen them. They look quite tough, don't they? They look quite forceful, and they're not. They're soft padded, they're fleecy, they can move their mouth up and down, they can sort of nuzzle around, but it is a process in terms of them getting used to it. And actually it's quite horrifying for us as owners to put them on, because it feels like you are sort of like you muzzle a dog. It feels like you're muzzling your horse. Well, you are, essentially. Yeah,
well, and I think that if in Shetland your pony is only going to get the rubbish chops of stuff that has died off and dried, well, that's what we want them to get in Suffolk. And so providing we teach them, and like you say, the grazing muzzles, it's a process of working out which one fits best. You then have to teach them how to graze with it. But what it should do is it should then allow them to only eat the stuff in the grass which is lower in sugar and more fibrous. So we're still getting that constant eating. So that natural habit of spending 70% of their day eating and moving, but without the same amount of calorie and sugar intake that you'd get without it. But I am very aware that it is a concept which, and especially if you say kind of had one of those slightly hard plastic rubbish ones that hasn't fit very well, it's maybe rubbed, the ponies have got it off within half an hour because they're cross with it. And frustration behaviour is really important, that we need to look out for it, because if we're getting frustration behaviour with grazing muzzles on, we are doing something wrong. We haven't fit it properly. We haven't taught them to use it properly. Or a really common mistake is that we're putting it on them and then putting them out on really short grass. They can't eat on short grass. That is the entire point of the muzzle, is to stop them eating short grass. So we can't put a grazing muzzle on and then turn them out onto this really short pasture. It has to be on grass that's at least, a good 20 centimetres long if you can, 10 centimetres kind of at best. And that's when we're then going to have much happier ponies that tolerate it really nicely.
And I've actually wanted to ask you about this, Katie, because we are the victims, I'm going to say it, of those short grass paddocks, because we haven't had the rain. We have had the rain, but it's just little spiky, bright green shoots now. That's all that we've got. So what we've been doing is giving them soaked chaff before they go out, and then just letting them out for sort of an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, where they're hopefully, walking around, they're marching around. A lot of the time they're a bit angry, they've got it on, but we haven't got access to that longer grass. And we've obviously been reading that you need longer forage. We've got hedgerows that hopefully they'll be able to look, But what do we do in that scenario, Katie, where we actually will never have long grass in our fields because we don't have the acreage?
I think that we can. I think that we probably just need to work out how to manage our grazing differently. I think that we have perfect laminitis weather at the moment. So we had dead, stressed grass through the drought. We now have this kind of humid, damp, warm weather, which is going to really facilitate that very high sugar grass growth. And so that grass is not currently suitable for a pony that has previously had laminitis. So what do? Well, we have to supplement them with a different form of forage. At this time of year, if you really genuinely have no grass, but the grass is, when they genuinely have no grass, it's not growing, well, they can go out on it. When you know that it's growing again and everything is short and sweet, then we have to provide alternative forage. And yes, we can let them out with the grazing muzzles on so they can wander around and run around and everything else. But we then need to make sure that they're having a separate access to forage. We know that within 2 hours, a pony can eat its entire 24-hour amount of grass. If they know that they are being restricted, we know that ponies are more than capable of eating their entire 24-hour amount in that 2 hours. So unfortunately, it's not really a safe thing to do. I mean, and the other thing is, there's ways of doing it, time dependent and everything else. You go for a walk with the grazing muzzle on and go find them some long bets on the banks and, just more than just the fields as well. But yeah, at the moment that really short stuff is pretty sketchy. So, I would say avoid completely and supplement with a known quantity like that, low sugar haylage or the kind of, or the low sugar hay. I know we've spoken recently about the idea of, and when it's 30 something degrees outside, soaking hay can be a little bit challenging. And so actually going and finding yourself something like one of these haylages that has been tested low in sugar is a slightly more straightforward thing to do at this time of year.
Yeah, that's been brilliant, having the option to soak hay. And then on other days, if we want to rest, because we can't do 1 hour soaking because of other commitments, we've then got our under 7% haylage, which has been brilliant. And I was wondering, Katie, is it possible when we let them out with their grazing muzzles on and we only have short grass, is it possible to do little buckets of chaff, the 2.5% low sugar chaff outside?
Yeah. Grass, hay, all of those things. It's just they need to know, they need to learn how to eat with it. And that's the main thing, is that chaff they're going to struggle to eat with the grazing muzzle on. But I've definitely seen many ponies eat hay with grazing muzzles on.
Okay.
And then, and that's where we then get back to that conversation about the track system. Because in a track system, a lot of the time the grass is either gone because it's just been trampled or has been physically removed, at which point you have that ability to have them out and moving without having to worry about there being grass in it. And that's where the track system has that advantage over, say, the grazing muzzle system. And it's not to say that they can't be both used together. You can spend half of your time out with a grazing muzzle on and the other half of the time in a track system, depending on kind of the weather and the facilities and everything else.
And of course, the biggest challenge with track systems is not necessarily persuading the owners. A lot of us are team track. It's persuading the landowners, because so many horse owners don't actually own the land that we graze on. What tips and tricks, Katie, have you got for either persuading the landowners or for those who are really against track systems because they poach the land? Speaking from personal experience, how do you get a bit creative with your field layout if you can't do a track because of restrictions?
So there are other ways of creating a track that isn't just one bare rubbish patch. You can create mazes and things like that. And I appreciate that, again, some landowners aren't super keen on lots of electric fencing, but actually you can create bits where you're, rather than just one long thin strip, your field, your kind of standard rectangular field that you get on your livery setup is divided up so that they have to walk round and round and round and round to get to that pile of hay, that water bucket, whatever it is, just to try and increase that. So rather than that ambulation, that walking being all around the outside of the field, you create a maze, and that maze can be changed on a weekly basis so that you have a reduced amount of poaching. Now that's great if we're not super worried about the grass intake. Obviously, if we're using our track system to prevent, the grass intake and only feed an additional forage like hay or haylage, then we're going to end up poaching the land. It depends on how much money you've got to spend. I have a couple of clients who have created their tracks. When they've had trees taken down, they've put wood chip down. And so actually the tracks look rather beautiful because what they are is wood chip walkways around the outside of their field. Wow. So you've got your central field in the middle where if you've got something that can eat more and say is being exercised more outside of your normal, everyday life, that goes in the middle. And then you put a lovely wood chip or sand track around the outside of that main field. So it still looks beautiful. But you then have that that low grass or grass-free track. And if you have all your horses that you don't want to be having that stuff in the middle, well, you can then cut the middle for hay. You just make sure that you put a big enough gate in that you can. So there are definite ways around it.
Do you find, Katie, that part of the struggle is the fact that owners now need to be so creative in their thinking? We all live busy lives as horse owners trying to manage the very intense workload of having horses. Do you find that actually part of the struggle is having the time to think about the movement and the exercise, the low sugar forage, how much our horses are eating, and balancing that with the, day-to-day running of looking after a horse and working and having a family and all the rest of it?
Yeah, I think we need to look at what our population of horses looks like now compared to 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think that, I've been qualified for 13 years and I'd say most, it's not changed a huge amount within that necessarily, except maybe our attitudes to kind of ridden exercise and things. But 30 years ago, your horses would be hunting. They would be eventing, they would be pony clubbing, they would be working, they would be pulling, they would be driving. The idea of having a horse that wasn't for an athletic purpose was much less common. And so all of our feeding was designed around giving them loads of energy and getting them to do more. And, they'd be in these massive fields where they could freely decide how much they wanted to eat on kind of fairly, not particularly exciting grass, but they would all be exercising. Even 15 years ago, the idea of retiring a horse to a non-ridden retirement, we used to think that an aged horse was over 15 or over 18. I've got plenty of horses on my books that are 31. Now, they're not being exercised, but we're still needing to manage their weights. And those horses just wouldn't have existed. We would have put them to sleep. We didn't have our ways of maintaining the rest of their health, that long ago. Wow. Whereas now, we have so many more horses that are not doing that amount of exercise. That's
sort of taken me back, Casey. It has really sort of taken me aback in terms of thinking about the purpose of horses in our lives as humans. And, we debate on Curious Equestrian all the time, horses as pets. Do horses want a job? Do they want to compete? What do we want our horses for selfishly in our lives? How can we make their lives better? And we question every aspect of horse ownership. And actually debating the horses as pets argument certainly comes into this discussion as to those who don't have a job, whether they can't because, they've had trauma in their past and they're, mentally they don't like to be ridden, or maybe physically they've been retired, way younger than you'd expect a horse to be. Therefore, they're not working. Actually is having a big impact on a horse's weight if it's not carefully managed. Absolutely. And I think that, I have great debates with quite a few of my clients. I like a debate, but, it's just because we always used to do it one way doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. And I think that what we are now much better at in our equestrian behavioural science knowledge and things like that is reading horses better and assessing things better. And as part of that,
we are talking about both our five freedoms in terms of our behavior models, but also this now concept of the 5 domains. So it's not just about a horse being kind of having all the right things thrown at it. It's also a horse living a good life. And as part of that, we have to give them freedom from disease, and we categorize obesity as a disease. You know, when we're now talking about living with obesity rather than being obese. Obesity is very much a disease. But we also need to make sure that we're giving them freedom from hunger and distress, and we're creating happy horses. And so we are now going to have to say, well, actually, the world has changed. Our leisure horse population has changed. Our knowledge has changed. As owners, we don't want to just put them in a stable for 16 hours a day and put them out, you know, on a rubbishy sandy bit for an hour and hope for the best. We want to give our horses a good life. And so how do we know what a good life is? Well, like we said before, we go back to that natural environment. How does that horse live naturally? What would its time be doing when it was in its natural environment? And so we can then go, well, okay, well, we need to give it freedom from disease. So we need to make sure it's not obese, but we also need to give it freedom from its mental distress, and we want to make it happy. And so we are being put in a position as horse owners that we suddenly have these two hugely competing things, because in our mind, well, a happy horse is an eating horse, because a horse should eat 70% of its time, and my horse is really cross when I don't feed it properly, and my vet has told me I have to give it only 1.5% of its body weight as hay a day, but it eats it in half an hour, and then what does it do all day? It's going to give it ulcers. You know, we hear this all the time. And I think everybody is right. I'm not saying that I have a perfect solution, just saying that it's hard. It is really hard. And actually owning leisure horses can be harder than owning a competition horse, because we have all of these other things that we're trying to do to make our horses happy and live a good life and have those 5 domains of happiness as best we can. As best we can interpret, but it's really hard. And that's where the likes of Roxanne Curtin's work on kind of changing up our grazing habits, and the National Equine Welfare Board's work on the grazing muzzles comes into its own, because it's how do we create that good life for our leisure horse in a way that's compatible. Because if if a normal person who has to earn money to own the horse, because that's the other thing that's changed quite a lot, the horse owning public are now actually having to work a lot more. It's, we have a different society that we live in. You're working from 9 till 5. You then have to do the school run. You have to feed the kids. You have to do all of these other things, whatever they are, walk the dog in your life. When do you have time to do that hour of exercise? When do you have time to change your electric fencing up? So I completely get it's really challenging, but it's so important.
And it's so fascinating to hear all these different elements that have changed over the years, how we keep horses, how now the owners are a working population. They're not aristocracy who are landowners with grooms and servants on the yard, essentially. And also how you mentioned that there's been this shift towards people keeping leisure horses and horses as pets, and retiring their horses and keeping an older horse population, which is fantastic in terms of the love and adoration we have for our animals in this country and across the world. But to add to that conversation and that debate, Katie, do you think horses ultimately should be kept as domesticated animals and as pets?
Oh, what a challenging conversation. I mean, I'm a horse vet. My job is looking after horses. Do I believe that the majority of horses I go and treat are innately miserable? No, I don't. Do I think that actually the majority of clients that I have and the majority of people I go and see are heavily invested in their horses living a good life? Yes. Do I think that the obesity-related diseases such as laminitis are more prevalent in the horse population that aren't being exercised and aren't being ridden? Yes. So do I believe that the only thing we should do is stop riding them and put them in a field and everything else? Absolutely not. Basically saying that there are so many pros and cons of exercising versus not exercising horses. And there are so many ways that we have what I would consider, in my interpretation of good welfare, very happy horses and high welfare situations in ridden horses. And I also think we have some fairly low welfare situations, especially, in regard to our conversation about obesity, in non-exercised, non-ridden horses. And certainly our ability to keep obesity levels down and laminitis levels down in non-exercised horses is really challenging. Do I think that the ridden horse world and competitive horse world is perfect? No. Do I think that we should be all doing a lot more to make it better? Yes. And a separate conversation, my other hat on is doing riding for the disabled work. And we've done a lot of work with the Charter of the Horse, trying to improve, improve education. And so much of it is education. It's why I don't mind coming on and sitting chatting to you, is because actually, if I can just change one or two people's way of working with their horses based on our conversation, then surely it's a good hour spent. But no. Nothing's perfect. And, should we own dogs? Should we own cats? Should we do half the things that we do? Probably not, but, we're going to do them, and we should just do it to the best of our ability. And I don't think that not riding them is the answer long term.
And how exciting that actually what was once seen as a veteran horse at 15, which I still can't believe that our veteran classes in the showing world, it's for a horse 15 years and over, which just blows my mind, coming back to that traditional looking at an older horse. But how exciting that actually our horses are making 31 and into the 30s now. How does it feel as a vet seeing these changes in terms of horses living longer lives, horses being loved as leisure creatures as well as working animals?
Yeah, I think it's lovely, and the only reason it's been able to happen is a better understanding of aging diseases. Nicola Jarvis from Red Wings has a great quote, which is this: age is not a disease; it just means you're more likely to get them. And so we are getting much better at managing our horses, and with that, with the extra drugs that we have now, the medication, the testing, all of those things, especially the management of diseases like equine Cushing's disease, we are creating a much healthier population. Because I think the one thing that we shouldn't do is say, well, all horses should get to 35 and have them living miserable lives. A horse should only be allowed to live to 31, 32 if they're having a lovely time and they're comfortable and we're managing their arthritis and we're managing whatever else has got going on in the world. But no, geriatric medicine is lovely. And, if you can have that relationship with that horse as an owner, but also as a vet, we know our patients for quite a long time often. And watching them kind of living their best life and going through kind of competitive world and, or whatever else they were doing when they were younger, and then kind of a semi-retirement and then a proper retirement. Yes, it's lovely. Is it for everybody? And is it for every horse? No. There are some horses that just don't cope with that change of environment because they are so, their mindset and their energy has always been towards doing things at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I suppose it's a bit like people. But, no, I think with the new science and the new medicine we have, we're doing an okay job.
Isn't it interesting, Katie, several times you've mentioned just like people, so movement and exercise, just like us, we all have to watch our weight and up our exercise and, up our steps every day. Diet wise, we have to watch what we eat to keep fit and healthy. Same with our horses. Do we need to be more judgmental when looking at our horses? Do we need to see them, as almost like we do when we look in our own mirror every day? I mean, it's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because we often talk about our own weight and what we eat, but actually we need to make sure we're not maybe where we treat ourselves to a cake. Maybe we don't need to treat our horses the way that we do ourselves sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, needless to say that my dog, who I have complete dietary control over, is significantly slimmer than I am. I don't know. It's an interesting one. So my other half and I have similar jobs, but in different fields. So he's a human paramedic working in first opinion land. So he spends a lot of time talking to people about obesity related diseases and stuff like that, and quality of life and managing things. I think it's really important actually to not be judgmental, because that means that we're hard on ourselves. And I think I don't know enough about human psychology to kind of compare specifically, but when we become really hard on ourselves as people, often it's when things become quite unproductive and we become demoralized and we go, well, it's not working. It's always been like that. That's just how it is. And trying to get towards a certain body image or a certain look can actually not be particularly positive in the human field. So I suppose in that respect that maybe we shouldn't be so hard on ourselves in the horse world. And I think that remembering all the things that makes it hard is really useful, because it can then mean that we can problem solve a bit better. But obviously, yeah, we do still need, I'm not saying that we shouldn't sit there going, oh God, our horse has gained a bit of weight, too much weight this summer, but actually going, okay, fine. Horse is bigger than it was, but I've just had my knee replaced, or the horse has, I don't know, had a bruised sole for 6 weeks, and that's why. Okay, we need to not let this get any worse, but how do we make this better? How can I maybe use the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to make this better, and not go, oh my God, I can see that fat pad. That fat pad has gone a bit bigger and I must do something right now. Oh my God, I'm going to kill my horse. We can be a bit kinder on ourselves, and a lot of the time that exception to that is where we know that we've had a history of laminitis, and we know that slightly bigger fat pad is absolutely the thing that tomorrow means that the horse's feet are going to be sore. That's when we probably do need to be a bit more judgmental on ourselves and a bit harder on ourselves and our horse's appearance, to be able to get to that point. There's a big link between increased exercise and horses' metabolic health being better. So we know that horses can be fatter, but if they walk more, their insulin regulation, so that indicator of metabolic health, is much better. And so, it's not oh my God, I have to, absolutely diet my horse immediately if your horse is otherwise healthy. But, and not be super, super harsh in that way. But, again, let's sit down, let's work out, how do we make them walk more? How do we make that grazing pattern look more natural? All of those things, rather than being super mean on ourselves, unless that horse has had laminitis in the past, or is morbidly obese and getting very, very, very solid fat pads, at which point, I think you're going to be wanting to work with a vet and maybe a nutritionist to help you and not feel like you're doing it alone.
And I was going to ask you, who do we turn to? Because for us, if we want to lose weight, we know we go to the gym, we can get a PT, we can get, a life coach. Someone will hold our hand and guide us along the way. But our vets are under pressure. We call out our vets usually for an emergency situation, or if our horse is in, pain, or there's a problem and we need your help immediately. I've never seen a vet as someone who I could ring up and say, my horse is a bit fat, how can you help me? How do we approach this? Who do we call?
Oh, I think most vets love that conversation. We love helping people to help them. A lot
it's
of the time
never crossed my mind, Katie, to call you and say, my horse is fat. It's always, 100%. My horse has got a swollen joint. My horse has got a soft tissue injury. There's an abscess. It's always that high octane panic, isn't it? Where we need your help, in an emergency. What do we do about those conversational queries?
How many times when we're out having a visit like that do we then get on to managing the other ponies? Yeah. When we're sat there watching that horse, post colic or whatever it's doing, we're then having a conversation about general management. And I don't think any vet objects to having a phone call, as long as it's not like an hour a day every day. But that's where our vaccine visits. So there's, there was a study a while ago where they were trying to get vets as part of the vaccination to give a body condition score and actually give like a little kind of green, amber, red warning to clients when doing the vaccinations. So yeah, your vet is there routinely, at least annually. Have the conversations with them then. If you are having a genuine worry that you're really struggling with the horse's weight, give the vet a ring and have a conversation. Because ultimately we are really, I make more money out of your horse being sick, but it makes me happier when the horse is not sick and we prevent it. And so that type of conversation is absolutely appropriate. The other people who are really super helpful are the majority of feed companies have an in-house degree level nutritionist. Depending on how many horses you have in the situation, they'll often come out and actually do a yard visit. They'll bring the weigh bridge, they'll body condition score, and then talk you through the diet. There's also independent nutritionists who you can reach out to, and obviously you have to pay for that service. But we'll come out and talk you through the horse's diet and management and work with you as to the facilities you have and the horse's own needs to then be able to create something. So I think that there is no harm in reaching out to somebody. I think the problem what a lot of people have, and I maybe get shot down for this, is we don't want to disturb people. We think, oh, Katie's too busy to have that conversation with me. So I type it on my local social media, my horse group, that chat thread and whatever it is, online forum. And you get so many opinions that you're then so overwhelmed with all of this advice. Half the people are telling you you're doing the wrong thing. The other half are telling you that you're abusing your horse. But the vet's told you that the horse needs to lose weight, and how to feel demoralized in 5 minutes. It's literally do that, isn't it? Whereas at least if you have a professional having that conversation with you, then you know that you're hopefully working around someone with an understanding of the health, but also the ethics of what you're trying to achieve. But also with a knowledge of your own setup and your farm or your grass or your whatever it is, to do it. Like silly little things, where we are, the A12 divides us between sand and clay. So we are going to have a different dietary management between those two things. Because if you put that laminitic pony on short grazing on the grass, on the grass which is on sand, it's going to fill itself up with sand, and we're going to end up with problems with sand colic. If you put that same horse on a clay field, you're going to have a very different ability to manage that grass, and that track is going to be ruddy useless on clay unless you have lined it with everything under the sun come winter. But maybe it's the right thing in the summer, So yeah, someone that just has more knowledge of you is going to be far more productive than if you're just trying to do it from online advice.
And it's about being that expert and about being curious in your setup, in the field, the types of grass, your horse, how much it needs to eat, learning each different aspect that actually we're not traditionally taught, are we, as horse owners? We all start usually, with either horses in the family or at riding schools. And our first port of call with a horse is about how to ride. It's not about how to feed your horse or how to exercise your horse or sugar levels. It's always about your riding technique. And then actually you get a horse and wow, you've suddenly got a whole journey to embark upon. Where do you think is a good place to start, Katie, in terms of facing this issue head on? You've got your horse, it's slightly overweight, it might be obese, it might be fat, however it may be scoring. Where do you tackle first? Where's your first port of call?
I mean, in the big subject area, I guess it is it's education. It's recognizing we have a problem and then working out how can we achieve that. And like I said, going to that vet, going to that nutritionist is going to be a really sensible thing for you as an individual. For a long-term thing, I'm probably about to go and do a very similar conversation with the Pony Club on Thursday night. And, trying to get that education in there where, whether you're working up the levels of Pony Club or if you were a horse owner, you can do BHS qualifications. Just because you don't have to doesn't mean that you can't go to your local BHS training centre and get some information that way. And you don't have to, blindly be told everything that, that person is telling you. You can obviously use your brain and use science to formulate your own way of doing things. But something very simple like that is quite a good way for your kind of, if you're coming into horses or you've been out of horses for a really long time. One of my favorite things is talking to clients where they have had horses when they were teenagers. They go off to uni, they've had a busy life, and now they are buying themselves their horse and their kid's horse. They're going to go ride out together and live their best life. But this equine science has changed so much in that kind of 20 years maybe, or however long it's been since they've last owned the horse. So actually having those conversations are really helpful for everybody. But no, I think just having that kind of self-awareness that just because it's what you always used to do doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And then reaching out to the professionals in your life, who know you or if you don't know a professional in your life, someone like a vet or nutritionist is a really good place to start.
Do you think, Katie, it's also a matter of it's what we see also has an impact? Because if I think about all the horses in my life and the horses that I'm seeing in my life, I'm not surrounded by event horses or hunting horses or jumping horses. And actually in the advertising, in the YouTubers that I watch, we're seeing horses that aren't necessarily competition horses with a job. And we're seeing overweight horses wherever we look. In magazines, they're not all sort of fit and event ready horses. Where do you think the issue has got out of control in the sense of it has been normalised to see fat horses and actually think that they are a normal weight? Where do you think that stems from? How do we change it on a bigger scale when we're looking out across the equestrian industry, and unless you're in that sports field, the horses we're seeing are not lean and fit?
I think showing is doing an okay job. They're definitely trying. University of Liverpool is working with a lot of the show horse people and the agricultural shows and things like that. There's a new initiative where they're trying to encourage vets to go to shows and give out prizes for the best body condition. It's a bit scary when if you're the only vet there. And
it's like Miss Universe. It's like Miss Universe for horses.
But it's not about being skinny. It's about being fit and about being healthy. And so I think the showing world has a lot to answer for, but I think are doing a really good job. I was talking to a cob judge yesterday, and said to him, where are you placing these fatter horses? And interestingly, because he's from more of a driving background, he's more used to seeing fitter cobs, solid, but fit. And he was like, no, I'm going to be putting those horses with the very high body condition scores much lower down. And I think that you definitely start seeing that. I worked at a show last year where the judge they put the fat one last. And I went up to the judge at the end and said, thank you very much. It's definitely, it massively helps. And like we said, vets, farriers, all of these people going around going, this is not normal. This is too big. But it's a huge, huge worldwide problem. And if we're saying that on the study from 5 years ago that 40% of leisure horses were overweight or obese, then I'm sure that information would be worse now. No, education, and being open to the fact that it is not that you are neglecting your horse if you try and do something about it. If your horse is severely obese and you're doing nothing about it, that is 100% neglect, and that is poor welfare. But if you're trying, and it's hard, but you're trying, it's okay that you're not succeeding all the time, but just ask for more help. Ask the people around you for help. And yeah, hopefully we'll then slowly be reducing that average body condition score back down to a slightly more normal level.
So the number one cure, you think, Katie, to this normalisation of fat horses is education, starting all the way from little ones in Pony Club right the way to farriers and vets actually approaching the owner and saying, this horse is fat.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think that we can do it. I think that if we sit there with our kind of head in the clouds, or, you know, in the sand, and just go, this problem will just sort itself out. It's really not. It is a growing crisis. That is how it is described by people that are far brighter and more well researched than I am. I just sit and read their work and try and communicate it to other people. But yes, we have to educate everybody, and we have to be open to those conversations as horse owners that we're struggling.
And do you think, you mentioned your approach can be very blunt, Katie, and do you think sometimes what is needed is that shock factor? Because what we've seen we think is normal, and we need to reprogram our brains quickly.
Yeah, I think so. A direct approach, I think you're not supposed to call it blunt. I think you're supposed to call it direct. I think when you fluff things up, people interpret them in a different way. Whereas if you're very, very clear, and I think that by using the hands-on body condition scoring approach, or by doing weight tracking of your horses, I'm quite a big fan of using measuring tapes to do like a weight calculation, so round the girth and the length of the horse, so you can track your horse's weight in that way as well. I think that if you can be super hands-on and super direct and give some real practical conversational tips about how we do this, you're going to have a better conversation than if we go, oh, well, they're just a bit round, aren't they? Shall we see how we get on? Not sure about this, you know, and that will work better. I'm sure there are certain clients who wouldn't appreciate that approach, but I think for the majority, having a very direct, very frank, open conversation, but it must not be super confrontational, because the moment we make it super confrontational and we don't show empathy to how hard it is when people are going to stop having those conversations and turn off to what we're saying.
And do you think, I mean, actually, I'd be really interested to know, Katie, how responsive people are to talking openly about weight. How do your clients react when you say your horse is too heavy, your horse is too fat? Because I know that, you know, weight is a psychological issue. And like you mentioned, you know, people's dogs can actually be leaner than ourselves. My miniatures are far leaner than I, because they have to be, because they're laminitic prone, and we, you know, you see a slight ribs, they're lovely and fit. We've got their weight right down to something that I think you would be very happy at, and I would be so comfortable to say, I think they are the correct weight. But I myself, I'm thinking I need to shift a few pounds. So do you find that people are defensive because it's almost a bit of a personal reflection of our own weight as well?
I think, it's much harder for my small animal colleagues. They have much harder conversations than I do. I'm grateful that I deal with horses, not with dogs, because I think that can be much, much more challenging. I think, especially because a dog, we have complete direct control of their diet, and therefore it is a very specific reflection on ourselves as our owners if we're criticizing the animal's weight, because it's only because of what you fed them. Whereas with the horse, you know, we are governed by the time of year, we're governed by the fields that we have, we're governed by the fact that we're going to have a really rubbish crop of hay this year, and actually it might be quite high in sugar and there's not going to be very much of it. And you're then like, you know, there's so many things that create that challenge, that there are ways of having the conversation to make it less about the fact that the owner has done something wrong and more about the fact that they're working with a challenging situation, and how do we achieve a good goal from it. But no, I interestingly, and maybe this is me letting everybody's criticism go directly over my head and not hearing it, but I've only had one client that I've had a really negative conversation with about their horse's weight. And I was slightly taken aback, and I wonder if I got that person in the wrong conversation on the wrong day or something like that, because it's actually pretty unusual to have a really negative conversation. And it's, you know, for both my private vet work and my voluntary vet work, I spend a lot of time talking about horses' weights and very rarely have that negative a reaction.
And of course, that's another thing we have to bear in mind, like you say, Katie, with our horses that aren't competition horses, that actually there are periods of our lives where we might be going through something very difficult, traumatic, loss in the family, bereavement, job issues, where actually exercising the horse becomes the bottom priority, even though it shouldn't. But everyone hits difficult points in their lives, and actually maybe there are periods of time where it's actually no fault of anyone's, but difficult times have struck.
Yeah. And I think that it depends on the horse you have and the horse's history. And like we said, I keep going back to this conversation. If the horse has been laminitic before, we have slightly different guidelines to if we are dealing with just a generally overweight horse. I think that if your horse has been laminitic in the past, and we know that exercise is one of the biggest drivers to improving it, then recognizing that you're in a rubbish place, but maybe trying to work out how to get round to that, either for yourself in terms of actually sometimes exercising is very good for your brain. But also, do I need someone to come and help me out here? Do I need a friend to come and support me so that this horse can still have the management it needs, so that my horse now having laminitis isn't adding up to everything else on top of all the other rubbish things in my world. But I think it would be unusual for that period of time to go for a really long time. And, weight gain or weight loss isn't an overnight thing. It's a long-term conversation. And so, yes, things can go horribly wrong. And yes, we can have a rubbish time. And yes, we could break a leg. We could do whatever it is that means that things have gone wrong. But it doesn't mean that we can't try and work out a strategy together to get to the other side of it. It just might look different to the strategy you had before whatever that crisis point was in your life.
So to recap top tips, we've got grazing muzzles, we've got low sugar forage under 7%, we've got track systems, we've got exercise, including going for walks, as well as ridden horses being ridden out and lunging and other areas of exercise. We can all go walking. And I love that aspect, Katie, because sometimes it is nice to think of doing something together. And I actually said to Winnie, my horse, the other day, I said, we've got to lose a few pounds, so we're going to get walking. And I know we're not supposed to humanise our horses, but I feel like we're on a joint journey together where we're going to get fit and we're going to get healthy and we're going to get walking together. We're going to build some muscles. We're going to do some hill work to help those thighs and, to try and make it a bit more fun. And like you mentioned, you using humour and those sort of lighter aspects, actually us as owners, kind of seeing this as a mission that we can all embark on together. Because actually putting weight aside, we all want to be fit and we want to be active and we want to be healthy. And for me, being strong is something that I really want to be. So doing a bit more hill work. And actually Winnie could benefit from that as well. So doing it together makes it feel less isolating. I think less scary as well.
And I think concentrating on your metabolic health, it's the conversation human medicine are having at the moment. It's not about your appearance, it's about your metabolic health. And actually that's the exact conversation we're having in regards to obesity. We're trying, to work around the fact that actually a significant proportion of obese horses have very poor metabolic health. We know that exercise improves metabolic health. We know that weight loss improves metabolic health. So we are not doing it for the aesthetic of the horse. We are doing it to improve your horse's metabolic health. And that is ultimately our end goal. It's not about being fit enough to go around a 4-star competition. It's about having good metabolic health.
Katie, before we say goodbye, just tell us what will happen if for the next 13 years, us as horse owners do nothing. What will happen to the state of our equestrian industry and our equines, in the UK and across the world?
So I think that the majority of laminitic horses that I see are now purely due to metabolic disease rather than we've done a really good job of managing equine Cushing's. They are now majority down to obesity and metabolic disease. So I think we'd see a huge amount more laminitic horses, which is a horrible, horrible, painful disease. I think that we'd see more horses with orthopedic issues. I think we'd see more horses with cardiac heart issues. And ultimately our welfare of our horse population in the UK would significantly reduce if we allow this to keep going. And ultimately as horse owners, as horse carers, as vets, our absolute philosophy should be to have as high welfare as physically possible at all times.
Katie, thank you so much for coming on Curious Equestrian.
You're very welcome. Always good to chat fat ponies.
And you're going to stay with us and you're going to come behind the scenes to answer some listener questions. Are you ready?